Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, and a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the miracle he had performed on the sick. When Jesus went up on the mountainside and sat with his disciples, the Passover feast was near. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward them, he turned to Philip. "Where shall we buy bread for them to eat?" It was a test, for he knew what he was to do. Philip answered, 8 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. But Andrew came to him and spoke up. "Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far will they go among so many?" And Jesus had the people sit down. There was grass in that place, and the men sat down, about 5,000 of them. Jesus took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed those to those who were seated, as much as they wanted. And he did the same with the fish. When they had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left. Let nothing be wasted." So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with pieces of the 5 barley loaves that left over by those who had eaten. And after the people saw the miraculous sign that Jesus had done, they said, "This is the prophet who is to come into the world." And Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him a king, withdrew again to a mountain all by himself. When evening came, his disciples went to the lake. They got into a boat and set off across the lake to Capernaum. By then it was dark, and Jesus was not with them. A strong wind was blowing, and the waters grew rough. When they rowed 3 to 3.5 miles, they saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on the water. And they were terrified. "It is I. Do not be afraid." Then they were willing to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached shore where they were heading. The word from the Lord in the house of the Lord. This is a preface to the sermon. Nancy and I were planning on visiting her grandniece in Tennessee. I intend to go to the National Convention of Local Pastors. It's going to be in Nashville. And Christine Dorso was a captain in the Army, 101st Airborne near Nashville. Now she's a major. And she's also almost not there anymore because she's got orders in the next week to report to Hawaii. Yeah, she and Jim Lee Dorso are both medical officers, and are headed for Hawaii. So we don't get to see her after all. Darn. But we're pleased that she made major, and she's a little bit of a thing, about 5'2", and she rappels out of helicopters and with backpacks and all that kind of stuff. She's 101st Airborne. So anyway, let's get serious here. Paul wrote to the church and said, "Be different because you have reason to be different. Be different because God has made you different. Be different because you have a reason to be special." And then we look at the Old Testament where David, it sounds a lot like our newspapers today. Here is a head of state who has done things that he shouldn't have done and has tried desperately to cover it up, has tried to get other people to cover it up, and it doesn't always work, does it? So David was picked by God to be the king of all Israel, the one who united the kingdoms of Israel, of Judah and Jerusalem, made them one nation, and yet he succumbed to the human weaknesses. Sometimes power corrupts us. Sometimes when we have a bit of power, we think it's okay for us to drive 130, 140 mile an hour down 2-lane highways. Among other things. That may be the least of it, I don't know. But David committed adultery. David committed murder in order to protect his good name. And when we read all the newspapers and the books and stuff about our government, we find all sorts of scandals in there that sound just about like that. Because we don't ever want to admit that we've let power corrupt us. We don't ever want to admit that we have become less than what God expects of us. Because when God ordained, anointed, named David to be king, he said, "You are my chosen one." And then he messed up. And God still said, "You are my chosen one. I will still protect you from your enemy. I will still see you through." Bathsheba had a boy, and we'll hear more about him a couple sermons down the line. So we don't have to get into his story right now. You put that one, check that one into your file cabinet, that we will talk about his son, Absalom. So, the problem that we have is an understanding that we never stand alone. We never are separate from God. Even when we do the things that David did, he was still one with God. Not in great standing, I don't suppose, but still loved by God. When we read the gospel, it's the greatest story that we ever get out of the New Testament. He took 5 loaves and 2 little fish and fed 5,000 men, plus all of the rest of the families that were there that aren't mentioned because some guy wrote the book. Other Gospels get it very much in detail. He set them in groups of 50 so they would be manageable and organized and coordinated so that the caterer could serve everything really quick. Can you imagine trying to serve 5,000 people sitting in one place? No. That's probably the miracle. So I don't care. I don't care about the miraculousness of his feeding them. Because he could do anything he chose to do. He could do the miracles he wanted to do. He could be whatever he wanted to be. And we still don't understand how he can get it done. The real gist of the story is that what he has for us never runs out. What he has for us will last through eternity, never running out. That's why he told his disciples, take a basket, walk through the crowd and pick up all of the pieces that are left. Now, the reason they picked up 12 baskets, we all know those. I keep talking about numbers. We love numbers. 12 is a number because there were 12 tribes. Number 12 is a number. Yeah. Making a difference. It could have been 13 baskets. Nobody said, where did the baskets come from? Nobody asked those kinds of questions because it doesn't have anything to do with the story. His feeding was was emblematic, was a demonstration of the fact that the blessings from Christ never are used up. They never run out. There's always more than enough. That's what the story is about. An even more important start is the disciples went down and got in a boat to row to the other side. And they went without Jesus. They traveled without him. They left their hearts with him on shore, I guess, because they were all alone. And a storm came up, and the waves grew high. I told somebody, I'm not a fisherman because the fish you catch in the golf course pond, you can't eat anyway. But I went on a fishing trip one time to Reindeer Lake. It's inside the Arctic Circle. It's a little bigger lake than Lake Michigan. It supposedly has 10,000 islands. And 1.5 minutes after getting in the boat in the morning with the guide, I was totally lost. Never to return if I didn't have a guide. And on the last day we fished, a storm hit that lake. And we had 9 to 10 foot waves with white caps, and we were in a 12-foot aluminum boat with a 9-horse motor, 3 of us. I prayed. And I hung on to the bottom of the boat. But I don't know. But we had a man who knew the lake, who knew water, who knew the boat, and he could slide through the dips and get on top of a crest and ride it and down, and we were fine, no problem. But I can understand the terror in the hearts of the disciples, because there were 12 of them in a little boat, and there were big waves and a lot of wind. And they looked up and saw Jesus walking toward them on the water, and they were frightened. I mean, that's just, we can't put another person in this boat, would have been their first thought. We can't have that one more person. It'll sink the boat. But the seas calmed. And Jesus got in the boat. And they were home. Alone they were in terror. Alone they were riding a rough sea. Alone they had no hope. But when they accepted Jesus into their boat, they were safe. David messed up big time. Jesus fed miraculously thousands of people to demonstrate to them that he had enough of what they needed, that they never feared running out. And when the disciples finally accepted the fact of that message from him, they were at peace. They were calm. They were home. So never doubt that there's enough of God's blessings for you. Never doubt that the love of Jesus is going to fail you. Never doubt. And then accept it wholly. And you're home. Accept. Come home. Welcome him into your boat. Know that he can guide you home. Welcome into your heart. And you are home. Be with the one who gives you peace. Peace that passes all understanding. The peace of love through Christ. Amen.